Hello, everybody, and hello, humans. Welcome to Not a Robot's Comic Review Show. This is the first episode that we will be looking into comic books that are outside of the DC and Marvel sphere, coming from several other publishers that we're interested in. My name is Brandon, and today I've got just one amazing co-host here with me. Julie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Julie. I read comic books, and I work at a grocery store. What's good?
Very nice. As you may know from other podcasts, we're always here to summarize, analyze, and editorialize over issues without worrying what the publishers think. But today, we're just going to take a chance to get introduced and talk about our interest in comics, where that's taken us, and anything else that we might discover about each other. But the next part is dedicated to those that support us with their hard-earned money, and that's not the only way you can. Like, subscribe, and download, share our episodes as much as possible. It helps get the word out, and that's the best kind of advertising. Now is the time to say a big thank you to the humans who help us support the podcast. They subscribe to our Patreon with tiers starting at just $1 a month so that we can make sure to keep bringing you more content. This is the Not a Robot Must Be a Human shout-out and roll call, and that shout-out goes to our humans Weird Science Jim, Blue Mondays, Hollister, and Roch Crockett. A big salute to all of you, and an even bigger thank you. So what are you waiting for? Sign up now and show us you just might be a human after all, and get a shout out on the Not a Robot Must Be a Human roll call. So today, since we won't be covering in any explicit detail some of the new releases from independent publishers, we'd like to take the opportunity to get to know each other a little bit more. So this is kind of the first time that Julie and I have really had a chance to talk to each other. But without any further ado, Julie, would you like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, about your relationship to comics, how you got into them, and some of the independent books that you've been enjoying recently or that you just enjoy in a very general sense?
Yeah, definitely. I started off like maybe 5 or 6 years old, really intrigued with the Sunday comics in the back of the newspaper. I'd always nab them out of my aunt's newspaper, and she'd track me down for them when she got to that part of the paper. Like, where's the comics, Julie? Where are the comics? Oh, they're right here. After that, since I've been watching The Simpsons since I was in utero, and I found out later in life, once I was born, a little after that, that The Simpsons had comics, the Bongo comics. I was all over that as a kid. And I still read The Simpsons Comic Royale, which is basically a compendium of their more popular works from like the 90s to the early aughts.
Mm-hmm.
Those were my first comic books, and then after that I kind of graduated after high school to more, I guess, a more broad outside the Bongo comics. I used to live near a comic book shop, which was like a 20-30 minute walk. A little hole in the wall next to a tiny little theater, comic shop, and I used to just browse their walls, find ones that I liked. I was never really particular to any specific brand. I just found out that discovered for myself that Image Comics had a lot of the stories I liked and that I wanted to read. So I delve headfirst into their, I guess their catalog.
Mm-hmm.
I think their first actual series that I bought and committed to was Alex and Ada.
Very nice.
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it takes place in Silicon Valley in the future, about robots and their, I guess their right to personhood, if you will. It's a pretty interesting story, but if you've seen any sci-fi movie that resembles that plotline at all, it's basically the same, but it's got its own little personality. It's got its own little thing going on.
Very cool. Yeah. I think everyone discovers Image Comics eventually. They've got such a wide catalog of books. It's truly a marvel to behold. But I guess to talk about my journey through comics, I've kind of talked about this a little bit on the both the DC and Marvel show. So I guess I'm a bit everywhere. But my journey kind of started In a similar way, I read a lot of newspaper comics when I was a kid. It makes it sound like I'm a lot older than I actually am. But yeah, I read a lot of newspaper stuff as a kid, and YA graphic novels, and they have those around the library, and those are easy to find, and kids gobble those up all the time. And I particularly, I loved Calvin and Hobbes. I still have a lot of the compendiums that I had when I was a kid, because my grandmother was a big Calvin and Hobbes reader, and she ended up giving me some of her books before she passed. And so I kind of read those for a while, and then I found superheroes, and that kind of shifted my attention away from everything for a little while. And then I kind of dropped off of comics just for a couple years. I wasn't as interested, and I was just looking at other hobbies. But probably around eighth grade, there was a girl on one of my quiz bowl teams who was really into comics, and she wanted to be an artist. Um, and I mean, I hadn't dropped off from comics to the point where I completely disavowed them, but basically I wasn't just reading them anymore. But there were still people who knew that I was interested in the medium, and she would kind of come to me and talk to me about them, and it kind of sparked a newfound interest to kind of start reading comics again, which was nice. So I had a library that was down the street from where I lived. They had a graphic novel section. A lot of it was filled with superhero stuff, but it was a nice way to kind of get back in there. And I mean, really from then on, I think I gradually just got more and more interested to the point where I actually started reading books week to week around freshman year of high school, right around the time of, for anyone familiar with DC Comics, DC Rebirth, which was a relaunch period, where a lot of books had new number ones, and it was a great place for people to jump on. And that's kind of how I was able to really start reading week to week books. And then from there, I was able to, take the characters that I was interested in, read a lot of their back catalog, and really just read more. But I think eventually, and this may be familiar to some people who read superhero comics, you kind of reach a saturation point where, you're looking for something more. You can't just read superheroes forever, or at least I couldn't. And so I think for me in particular, one thing that always interested me was the creative teams behind a lot of superhero books that I was interested in. And so one thing that I really started doing was tracing the roots back. So I would see a writer that I particularly liked, their name kept coming up, and I would basically, see what other books that person had done. And one of the first kind of prominent people that I really did that for was Ed Brubaker. I've been reading his Captain America kind of on and off through, books in the library, and I was just like, I really like this. What else has he done? And that led me to a series called Kill or Be Killed over at Image Comics, which I really enjoyed in particular. And so I think that was kind of my first foray into independent books, and then from there I just kind of looked into as many different Image books as I could find, and now I've got entirely too many, from not just Image but from other publishers as well. So that was kind of how my journey got started in independent books. A very strange journey, but it may be familiar to some people. I think just wanting something new, wanting something different that isn't entirely capes and tights. But with that, I want to take the chance to ask you, Julie. What have you been reading lately? What independent books have you been able to enjoy during the past couple months, maybe the past couple years? Some particular standouts that you'd like to mention? Because I know that during this crazy time, I'm sure a lot of us have been doing some reading, so it might be nice to
Yeah,
hear what
definitely.
you've been reading.
Well, Sex Criminals actually by Image Comics. It came out, I think, 5 or 6 years ago, and
Yeah,
it wasn't
around
until recently
2014, I
that I
think.
actually had. Pardon?
Around 2014, I think.
Oh, 2014. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right because I had just finished high school when it came out.
Mhm.
Um, what was it? Oh yeah. So I had tried to get onto it by buying issue by issue. They're like $3 or $4 a pop. But after a while, I kind of fell behind and I forgot which issues I bought. So I have multiples of the same issue that I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna unload. But
Hmm.
so I decided now, the last year I've had some extra income, which has been really nice. I decided to just buy the volumes instead, to just kind of like cut out trying to buy the individual issues. Like, you know what? I'm just gonna buy the collection
Hmm.
of the graphic novel and just call it a day. And the series just ended this past fall, and I got caught up on it, and I really enjoyed it. I've never really been drawn to the superhero comics. They just never interested me. I
Hmm.
think because superheroes themselves are so mainstream and the tropes are pretty familiar and similar for me.
Ugh,
Ugh. Yeah, I'm
you're
just
you're
like, I know what's gonna happen. I'm good. I'm gonna try something different.
ugh, you're you're breaking my heart, but
I'm
it's
sorry. There's nothing
understandable.
wrong with superhero
Yeah.
comics. There's nothing wrong with them. I just couldn't get into them. It's like
Mm.
Pokemon. It's a fine, thing. I just can't get into it.
Oh no. The one listener that
I'm
we
talking
had
about
just
Pokemon.
left because you insulted Pokemon.
Oh gosh. Oh, I'm a little Pokemon dude. You can just Digimon me. They're
Digimon.
gonna come.
Oh
They're
no.
gonna come and throw flaming poop at my door.
Yeah. But yeah, no,
Digimon.
that's
Digimon
understandable.
chase
There are
me.
a lot of people that just and honestly, I think that's the great thing about comics is that I mean, there's definitely a very heavy saturation of superheroes, almost to the point where sometimes it feels like you can't escape them. But the beauty is, if you're really looking for something interesting, there's about 15 million different genres of comics out there, ready for you to just snap up and read, which I think
Yeah,
is the thing
definitely.
that interests me most about independent books, creator-owned books, just the variety that's out there. And I mean, even though and this will probably get me fired, but even though I'm on DC and Marvel, I would probably say that the books that I enjoy the most in my collection generally tend to come from independent publishers or from creator-owned imprints like Vertigo or something like that, where it
Hmm.
has nothing to do with superheroes, or if it does, it's not any kind of mainstream superhero. So yeah, I
Yeah,
definitely hear you, but please continue.
definitely. I think another book series I bought, which I'm not gonna. Okay, I'll admit, when John Lewis died, I remembered that he had released these comic books like a couple of years ago, and I was
Mm.
like, oh crap, I was gonna buy those. I have the money now, so I bought his 3 book collection called March, and I've just finished the first one. I haven't gotten to the second one just yet, but
Mm.
I do have plans to read that one. That's a good one. It's like you said. There's a large variety of different
Yeah.
kinds of comic books. Not just superhero ones. The
Hmm.
genres are just out there. Sex criminals. It's 2 guys that just wanted to throw out. Fuck it. I just want to write a comic book series that, no holds barred,
Oh yeah.
which is awesome. It takes no prisoners
Yeah,
all the way
yeah.
through, and it's hilarious. It doesn't take itself too seriously, which is nice. March, it's this, it's a different way to tell the story about Jim Crow in America, the racism, the civil rights movement. It's an incredibly personal perspective that you can't really get in a movie or in a TV show. It's an incredible story.
Yeah, yeah, which
Um,
is, I mean, I'd say that's comics in a nutshell. It's very personal stuff because it's really just
mhm.
you and your story and your artist, and it's not a lot of, there's no studio influence. I mean, you might have an editor, but in a lot of cases, at least in independent comics, editors are people that you bring in really just to take a look at the story and say, does this make sense? And that sort of
Yeah,
thing. But they're not saying you can't do this, you can't do that. It just gives you a lot of freedom.
yeah, it really does. Especially if you're the artist and the writer.
Yeah.
Whoa.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that's a good series.
yeah. If you yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt.
you're totally fine. I'm learning the rhythm.
No, you're good. You're good. But yeah, yeah. Sex criminals march. Anything else you'd like to mention?
um, Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. That's a single issue graphic novel. It's created by the same guy that did Invader Zim.
Yeah, Jonan Vasquez.
So Invader, yes, that's his
Yeah.
name. I always forget his name. But no, his. Don't be mistaken because it's the same creator. Invader Zim is very kid friendly. It's it's sweet, it's demure, but it's also pretty edgy, which is nice.
Yeah.
Johnny the Homicidal Maniac is probably not for children.
Definitely not for children.
No. That is nightmare fuel for young offspring. You should probably save it for when your offspring are in high school.
Yeah.
Brooding.
Great.
That was a good one.
Yeah. That's great. Well, yeah, don't feel, don't feel intimidated. We can keep this very casual. This isn't me reading off the script. I'm just talking right now.
Oh.
But yeah. No, if you, I'm not trying to run the show. Like I have my script here just to kind of
Guide.
have some things in order. But you can interject. You can say, "What do you think?" You can ask questions of me. I don't want it to feel like I'm, putting you through paces. I'm not the puppet master.
No, you're good. You're just a Sherpa.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, very interesting recommendation. Some very solid stuff. I have not finished Sex Criminals. I think I got to issue 20, and then I was waiting for like the 5th volume to come out. I think there's only 6. And I kind of just
6.
I kind of just dropped off from there. The last thing I remember was that John and Suze had broken up, and then I was waiting for the 5th one, and then I never got around to reading it. But I'll finish it at some point. I should.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a great book. It's very interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that many illustrated penises in my life. I don't know that I entirely want to again, but it's definitely out there, and it's definitely very funny. And Matt Fraction, the writer of the book, is someone that I think is very talented, very good writer,
Most
very
definitely.
funny writer as well. And I would encourage people to check out some of his other work. He's done a lot of stuff over at Marvel, if you're interested in that, but this is the indie show, so let's try and keep it there. Wait 1 second. God. I want my computer to die.
If you're familiar with the Simpsons and Futurama, how they have jokes not just within the script and within the characters, it's also kind of in the background. It's it's a part of the show in different ways. There's kind of jokes everywhere. That's kind of how Sex Criminals is.
Oh yeah, a lot
even
of background gags.
Yeah, a lot of background gags,
Yeah.
a lot of fourth wall breaks, a lot of like even the numbers on the issue.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
I think the last issue, even though it's not the 69th issue, they call it 69.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm like,
that
oh my
doesn't
god, that
surprise
is
me.
great.
Yeah,
It's quintessential.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite bits was, and I don't even remember exactly what issue it was. All I remember it was like, there was a scene where I think Suze was going to confront the therapist who used to be a porn star, and like instead of showing a scene where they kind of talk to each other and yell and get in a fight or whatever, it just cuts to a scene of like Matt basically working on the script. It gets really meta. It's like a Grant Morrison moment.
Yeah, they did that twice.
Yeah, where it's like they're basically having a conversation about it, and I just was cracking up the entire time. And I also think it speaks to, in addition to Matt's great script work, I think it speaks to Chip Zdarsky, who's the artist in the book's strength as a cartoonist. I think he's just able to capture a lot of these background gags, like we said, a lot of these facial expressions in such a great and creative way, where it's always keeping your attention. It's always funny to look at. So yeah, no, that's I don't know if it's, like I said, I haven't finished it, but it's certainly a book that was interesting to me.
I'm definitely not going to ruin it for you, but it is definitely worth finishing. Because, I mean, it's an ending you wouldn't exactly expect, because it's just so off the story is just so off the wall on its own.
Hmm.
And to tell you anything about the rest of the series is just going to ruin it for you. It's an
Yeah.
experience. You have to go through the penises. You have to go dig through the forest of penises to get to the end.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I'm motivated now. I've got a couple more series that I may want to finish first, but I definitely got to get around to finishing Sex Criminals. Honestly, I should put that one at the top of my list, but I've got like 15
As long
million.
as it's a part of your list.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I feel like I have like 15 million recommendations for creator-owned books or independent books that I need to finish. That I'll start. I'm so bad at finishing stuff sometimes too. I don't know if that's just me, but like I'll get like I'll start a series and it's really great, and maybe I'll get halfway through and then I'll just drop off. And sometimes I'll come back and finish it and really push myself to get through it, and then sometimes I just don't. And I don't like doing that. But yeah, no, some very interesting stuff. So, like I said, this is a free, open conversation. So, Julie, if you have any questions you want to ask of me, feel free.
um, I can talk about myself this whole time, but it's good to talk about you too. What has been a comic that has really stood out to you in your lifetime? Like, what's the one that's kind of close and dear to your heart?
Um, that's a tough one. Because I feel like there are
Sorry, I'm
so
sorry if it's
many. It's
too
just
personal.
no, no, not at all. It's a good way for us to really get to know each other. Just because there are a lot of books that are fun for me to read that just like I could just go back to them and it's a fun whimsical read, and then there are the ones that really speak to you on a personal level. I mentioned earlier Kill or Be Killed by Ed Brubaker. I think that's I mean I'm Ed Brubaker is one of my favorite, if not my favorite writers of all time, comic book writers. And that's a book that's very personal to me just because the main character Dylan Cross, um, deals with depression in a way that just kind of it spoke to me at a really specific point in my life, and I won't go into too much detail about that, but it his kind of take on the world and his feelings of depression and anxiety towards his relationships and sometimes his feelings of inadequacy. It just really related to me at a really crucial point in my life. So that was definitely one that spoke to me. Um, I think artistically, um, Frank Miller's Sin City is something that I can always come back to and just marvel at and get so angry at because I'm so jealous that I couldn't be a talented cartoonist like that. The way that he illustrated a page is incredible, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen. Even now, I think it's absolutely incredible. Um, God, I could just go down the list. So I'll just mention a couple highlights. And I don't want to talk your ear off, but I guess that's why we're here to talk about comics.
Don't worry, my ears are firmly attached to my skull. We're good.
So yeah. So I think one that definitely spoke to me recently is a book from a very popular writer, a writer that I very much enjoy, Jonathan Hickman's The Nightly News. It's a book that really just digs into media coverage and media portrayal. It came out in the late 2000s during a time when media was being called into question, and I think it's just as relevant then as it is today. And this isn't, to take any partisan approach, but I think really it's just an interesting examination of both how we are kind of controlled by the media in a sense, which sounds a lot more menacing than it actually is, but also how easily people can be swayed into kind of these radical groups that basically call them into action and become murderers. And it's just a fascinating read. And I think if you ever get a chance to take a look at that, not only is it a great story, but artistically, it's one of the most visually bizarre things I've ever seen, because Jonathan Hickman, in addition to being a very talented writer, is also an artist, and his style is unlike any other. At least it incorporates a lot of digital design work, as well as standard pencil work, and it's absolutely incredible. Um, Kind of in that same vein, a book that talked about a lot about truth was Transmetropolitan, which I think is probably one of my favorite comic books of all time. It's I it's a book that takes place within an undisclosed future, but it basically deals with uh, basically this journalist named Spider Jerusalem who acts as a truth sayer throughout a fictionalized version of at least what I think to be New York City, just called the city in this situation, and it kind of starts off as just him exposing various different social problems within the city, and then it really evolves into being a story about him basically taking down the president of the United States of America. Um, and it's I think it's a book that resonated with me upon my initial read. Still resonates with me just because of a lot of its social commentary, which I feel is so on par with how we view American politics, how government is portrayed in a lot of ways. I think it's one of the most accurate portrayals of standard U.S. government procedure. It's a wonderful read, and it's about 60 issues long. It's got some gorgeous artwork by Derek Robertson, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. That's like I said, it's absolutely just one of my favorite books. But those are the ones that are really personal to me, that really speak to me on a human level. And then there are ones that I think I just read because they're fun, because I like to have a good time, because we do that too.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Definitely. I'll have to check
so
out that political book you're talking about. That sounds really interesting.
no, sorry, say that again.
I'll have to check out that political book you were just talking about. That sounds really interesting. This like piqued right there my
Oh
interest. Like,
yeah,
oh, hey.
yeah. No, I would definitely recommend checking out the
What was the
nightly
name again?
news. Checking out um, the first one was the nightly news by Jonathan Hickman. It shouldn't be hard to find. I think they put out a new
There we
edition
go. Now I'm
recently,
recording again.
and then the second one is Transmetropolitan. That one shouldn't be hard to find either. And then I'll throw in an extra one there. Even though I know our co-host isn't a big fan of superheroes, I would be remiss if I didn't mention a book called Ex Machina by Brian K. Vaughan. That one I actually only finished recently. Yeah, the Nightly News, I would definitely recommend that, Transmetropolitan. And then before we briefly got interrupted, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Ex Machina, which is a book by Brian K. Vaughan, which is basically about a fictional superhero who is able to stop one of the planes from hitting one of the Twin Towers, and basically gets elected mayor of New York City. And the book really follows his time as mayor of New York across around 3 to 4 years or so. And even though there are definitely some superhero moments, it's really more of a grounded political thriller. I think the best description is like, you know, West Wing, and I don't know, maybe a little bit of Superman thrown in on the side. So if that's something that interests you, I would definitely check that out. So yeah, it sounds like we've both got some interesting books in our back catalog. I wonder, Julie, have you had a chance to kind of connect with, um, you know, other comic book communities or anything like that? We briefly talked about how basically it's hard for us to kind of get our friends plugged into comic books. But I wonder if you had a chance to kind of go to any kind of conventions, or maybe just shoot the shit at a comic book store, or really just talk about your experience being part of the community, or maybe this is your first time.
This is actually my first time being inclusive in the community. I went
Okay.
to I checked out I frequented a comic book store in Berkeley. I frequented comic book stores in Castro Valley and Fremont. Um, I went to a convention once, and it was a small little dinky, like in a basketball court of a high school kind of convention, and it was kind of nice. It was
Yeah.
like I think a $5 entry fee. You just kind of went around
Mm.
the room, and that was it. I did pick up a couple comic books, and I wanted to continue the series. I think I got them for free to kind of get you hooked
Yeah.
from the creator. I can't remember what it was called, but I've been trying to find it and I cannot find it. Not the book itself, but like the series itself. Like the book I have in my storage somewhere because I intend to get back to it at some point, but I can't find the series, and I'll have to get back to you on that on what the series was called. I don't know if they even got their comic book off the ground, which is kind of not that I guess it does kind of worry me, but not to the point where it's oh my god, get this going or I won't live my life. It's just kind of like, oh, I guess their thing
Yeah.
didn't work out. That super sucks. That's about the extent of my experience with comic books. Everyone around me reads manga. Comic books
Uh-huh.
just aren't really
Oh
their
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
I'm like, oh, okay. I mean,
yeah,
manga's fine.
yeah.
There's a lot of good manga out there, but I have a hard time reading manga. I can't get the concept of reading from back to front. That's how I wipe. That's not how I read. No, wait, no, I don't go
Yeah,
back to
no, it
front.
can definitely be
That's
a little
nasty.
tricky. Yeah. Well, I mean, the best part is it's back to front and it's left, or what is it, right to left? Because we usually read left to right, but theirs is positioned completely
Oh,
flipped.
okay. I've been reading back to
Yeah.
front, left to right, and no wonder the story didn't make sense.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a completely different style. Even though manga definitely draws some influences from comic. It's weird because manga definitely drew its influences from early American comic books, and then, or at least in some cases, I know some historians might say it actually predated American comic books, but I'm not going to go into that. And now
Yeah,
you
that's a
look at a lot of comic
conversation
book art
for
in
some
it.
other people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm biting my tongue as I say that because I'm a history major, so I feel like I could totally go on a tirade about it, and I wouldn't even mind. But I'm not gonna do that for our first episode.
I'm
Um,
an engineering
but
major.
oh, okay. Well, this is proof that
Yeah, think
STEM and
planes
humanities
and
can get
physics.
along. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to see how manga has almost now done a reverse and is influencing a lot of comic book artists today. Um, but yeah,
Hmm.
I think my experience is a little bit different from yours because I've definitely been pretty plugged into conventions and stores for probably the past, excuse me, 6 to 7 years or so. Really, since my first convention in 2012, even if I wasn't reading a ton of comics at the time, I was just fortunate enough to be able to go to that one. So, if I remember correctly, my first convention would have been Kamikaze 2012, although it's not called Kamikaze anymore. Now it's just LA Expo or Fan
Mm.
Expo. And then I went to San Diego Comic Con for uh, 4 years, just because my mom had a friend. We were really fortunate. My mom had a friend who was kind of working in the exhibition hall, and she was able to get us tickets every year, which was really nice.
Nice.
And then when I went to high school, wasn't able to go to San Diego anymore, just because that connection wasn't really there anymore. Because I think she ended up leaving
Mm.
the exposition hall. So I started really just going to local conventions in Los Angeles, a couple crappy ones in hotels, and then when we moved, um, I still found a way to go to conventions when I could, and so now that I'm living in Massachusetts, um, I've tried to make my way to Fan Expo Boston, which is the biggest one there. So I've been fortunate enough to pretty much go to conventions every single year for the past 9 years, with the exception of, the most recent year, just because the world is on fire.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, I mean, for me, the benefit of being plugged into places like that is it's just, it really gives you a couple days to just kind of get immersed in the community when you're not able to do that with friends or anyone else, and really just look at some interesting comics, or just connect with people, or anything like that, which was always what I most look forward to. And then I had a bunch of different shops that I was going to, and it's kind of weird when you first start going there. It's very like transactional. You walk in, you pay for your stuff, you walk out, and then once they start seeing you regularly, then it becomes a bit more conversational, or at least it was for me. And I always looked forward to that. And sometimes you'll buy something in particular, and that'll spark conversation. So that's the kind of stuff that I love, and definitely I would say one of the better parts of the comic book community. But um, moving on, I think one other thing that we like to talk about, is just any recommendations that we might have in the future. I know that I'm reading a lot of independent books, really interesting independent books right now that I'd love to recommend. But Julie, is there anything that you'd like to recommend to the audience to get started?
Um, let's see, because I'm trying to flick through my head the ones I'm reading. Oh, I guess since Avatar is The Last Airbender is pretty popular, I'd probably say once you finish the series, start on those comic books because they just literally pick up from where the
Uh-huh.
TV series left off, and they're a fun read. You can read them with your kids if you've got offspring. I happen to I have the tomes. They're literal tomes. They're like the glossy, gloss with granite.
Yeah.
These are actual like Moses Ten Commandment tomes of these comic
Very
books. Yeah,
nice.
I mean I bought them a long time
Yeah,
ago.
those are
They
awesome.
are. They're heavy, but they're
Mm,
awesome.
yeah.
So yeah, I'd say start with that if you're trying to get into comic books, but you're a fan of the cartoon. I'd say that's probably a good place to start, and maybe Simpson
Hmm.
Bongo comics. That I think that's a nice place to go for because I started with Dilbert comics and the Far Side because those were in the paper, and then I went to the Barnes and
Right.
Noble and I just see the collections there. I'm like, oh hey, let me get started with that. Then it's like a snowball effect. It's like, all right, I'm familiar with these comics. Let me get started with the
Mm.
Simpsons because I see the TV show, but here are the comics. And then it just kind of snowballs into,
Yeah.
well, I like this format. Let me see what else is in this kind of medium. So yeah. Oh
Mhm.
shoot, excuse me. It's a nice transition.
Yeah. Yeah, no, those are some very solid recommendations, and I don't even think that if you want to read newspaper comics, or I guess what we would call strips, you don't have to necessarily be younger to enjoy them.
Yeah.
There are lots of people that still enjoy strips. I mean, I don't read them as much as I used to when I was a kid, but I'd be lying if I said, if I looked at them now, I'd still get a kick out of them.
I'm still a
Um,
sucker for Dilbert.
yeah, I'll still occasionally dig out some of my old Calvin and Hobbes stuff, and get a laugh out of that. Um, but yeah, on my side, I would say, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff. We're living in this second golden age, or I guess one could argue that the golden age technically never ended, because there's kind of like in the 2010s there was this boom in independent books, especially at Image, and it felt like there were like a million different series coming out all at once, and then some of those series started to end, and people thought it was just kind of going to drop off. But in the recent year, despite how crazy it's all been, it's been a really truly remarkable year for independent comics. So there's some really great ones out there that I'd love to recommend. And I have a list, but it's not really a list because I'm kind of just going off the top of my head. But some books that I would definitely recommend checking out. I think one of the biggest hits of this year is a book called Something is Killing the Children. It's by James Tynan the Fourth, Werther Deladera, and it's an absolutely incredible horror book if that's something that interests
Ooh.
you. Um, Yeah, for me, I know I definitely was not a big horror guy. I typically can't stand horror movies unless I'm watching them with friends. Otherwise, I'm not going to go out of my way to watch it by myself in a room because it'll freak me out.
I
But
can
in
only
the
watch them in
past
the
year, I've
daytime.
just been reading. Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I can't even do that because then it haunts me for the rest of the
Yeah.
day and then I can't sleep. Um, but yeah, it's just been a slew of great horror comics in the past year.
The
At least the ones that I've been reading. So, Something is Killing the Children. It's a 15 issue series. I guess technically still ongoing, but there's been a bit of a delay between the 15th and the 16th issues, just because it's kind of the main story just recently wrapped up. So if you go to Amazon, you should be able to pick up the first three volumes, which will collect all 15 issues, and then I think they're putting out a hardcover soon that'll collect the entire series. So for my money, I'd say probably just wait for the hardcover to get the whole thing there. It's a great read, and I've been following it since issue one because I was a big fan of the writer, and I don't think that he was expecting it to be the as big a success as it ended up being. I know I certainly wasn't. I was just going to read it because I liked him and I thought it was an interesting premise, and then it kind of exploded. So there's definitely that. That's from Boom Studios. Another great series that I'm enjoying that will be wrapping up soon is a book called Decorum from Jonathan Hickman, who I previously mentioned. It's kind of this space opera about a essentially a group of female assassins that recruit this courier. And one particular assassin is like super prim and proper, yet she's one of the most deadly ones. And there's also this underlying B story about like a space egg that one of the uh, kind of main authorities of the entire galaxy is trying to hunt down, and the paths are just starting to converge. We're on the seventh issue. It's an 8 issue series, so it'll be wrapping up soon. But it's an absolutely incredible book, and I think for my money, even if the story sounds a little crazy, it's absolutely worth your money to check out just for the artwork alone by Mike Huddleston. It's some of the most visually inventive stuff I've seen in like the past 5 years. So like I said, it's an 8 issue series. It's on seven right now. You could catch up through the singles, though. I definitely recommend probably just waiting for the hardcover, which I believe comes out in July. Um, and then there are like 15 other books that I could totally recommend, but then the episode would be 3 hours long, and nobody wants that. So um, I'll probably just recommend one more that I thought was a real standout, and that has to go to another writer that I previously mentioned, Ed Brubaker, who's putting out a series of graphic novels called Reckless. They're all standalone. You don't have to worry about reading them in order. It's basically trying to take the format of old paperback detective novels and basically using that format in comic
it's an
books with
anthology.
the same protagonist. Not quite an anthology. It's almost like um, like the Jack Reacher books or that type of
Hmm.
thing, where it's just like they're all standalone adventures or anything that John D. McDonald will write with Travis McGee or that kind of thing, where it's like it's the same character, but they're all standalone tales. They're just told at different points in time.
Okay.
So it's like that essentially. And the first book came out in December. The next book will be coming out, I think, if not this month, then next month, and then the third book is slated to come out sometime towards the end of 2021. Like I said, they're all standalone, so you can read them in any order. You could pick up the most recent one, and you'd be totally fine. But I definitely say go back and check out the first Reckless book because it's absolutely incredible. And Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, who's pretty much the regular artist that he works with, they're just an absolute incredible team. Um, but I'm going to stop talking for a second because I talk way too much. And I think we've gotten a really good chance to kind of talk about our relationship to comics and some of the things that we're interested in. And so now, Julia, I just want to ask you if you have any kind of closing remarks or anything else that you'd like to add, any other reflections you have, maybe any last minute recommendations, just anything else you'd like to add before we close out the show.
Yeah, a couple of things just to kind of tag on. One onto the convention thing. In San Jose every year, well, I guess used to be every year at this point, there used to be a thing called FanimeCon, and everybody and their
Mm.
mother in the Bay Area would go to that thing. And I never got a chance to go. I've been in the Bay Area for 5 years now, and it always happens on my birthday. So everyone fucks off to
Uh,
FanimeCon, and I'm at home, or they go on a Memorial Day barbecue, and I'm at home, and I'm trying to make plans with my
mhm.
friends to go. Hey, it's our birthday, let's do something. It's like, can we do it after or in June maybe? I'm like, fine, I'll celebrate my birthday by myself. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, that's
And
cold.
it's funny, my friends are like, why don't you just go to FanimeCon for your birthday? I'm like, don't you think I'd want to do that? Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, also, horror tag on Black Monday Murders. I've only have the first volume, but I think there's maybe
Oh my
one.
God, I'm so glad you mentioned the Black Money Murders.
What?
That's just such an excellent series.
Oh man, I only started on the first book. I'm trying to finish that to see if I want to buy the second one. But now that you said it's fantastic, I will commit to reading
Oh yeah, you
it.
absolutely will finish it. And then you, like everyone else who's read that book, will just be frustrated that the most recent arc hasn't started yet. But interesting that you mentioned the
Oh,
Black Money Murders because that's also another book by the writer that we mentioned, Jonathan Hickman, who is just like I said has one of the most interesting styles out there. And I don't know how much you've read just yet. Um, how
I've only gotten to the first
Okay,
issue.
yeah. So you're still pretty fresh, but yeah, no, I absolutely love that book, and you'll see throughout the rest of the because the first trade I think just has the first four issues. It's like filled with all these extra documents, and I know it seems like a lot of reading, but trust me, it's so great to read all the extra, emails or data pages or extra info because it really helps enhance the story. So yeah, Black Monday Murders definitely gets a
Sweet.
cosign from me.
Sweet. Well, that's all I had to add. Thanks.
Yeah, so yeah, on my end, I mean, like I said, definitely co-sign the Black Monday Murders, but I think one thing that we're really looking forward to doing on the just standard comic show, not specific to DC or Marvel, is just really take the opportunity to highlight books from various different publishers, whether they be, Image, which we've talked about, or Dark Horse, or Boom, which I know has been putting out some really interesting books lately, or any other, small publishers that we may come across. I'm a loyal patron of my local comic book store, so I'm always seeing new, interesting, small publishers put out books. One that I don't know if I can really plug it, but it's interesting at least is a book called ENIAC from Matt Kint and the amazing artist Doug Braithwaite. It's from a new publisher called Bad Idea. It's a bit of a tricky one to find because they're doing this very strange distribution method where they're not releasing any digital versions of the book and they're not releasing trades. So the only way that you can read it is in the physical copies that they send to select stores. And I've been fortunate enough to be in a place where the store that I've been going to has been getting those issues, and I've been reading it. And it's an interesting series, I would say. I'm not overly familiar with Matt Kint. I've read a couple of his books, but um, I think I'm not entirely sure I agree with the distribution method, but like I said, I'm always paying attention to new publishers. So I think even if we're not super scripted or anything like that, I think this show will be a really great opportunity to just kind of talk about the various different independent, creator owned, or small publisher books that we come across.
Definitely.
I don't know if you had anything to
You
add to
you
that.
have a very you have a very knowledgeable background of these kinds of things. I just kind of gravitate toward the books that kind of catch my eye. The stories like, oh hey, this is interesting. I'm invested. I'm going to read
Yeah.
it. That's kind of how I find my comics.
Hmm. Yeah, no,
Yeah, the
I'm.
background. I just scratch the surface and I move on.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I
no,
shouldn't, but I do.
I honestly blame it on being a history major because so much of that is research. So like, I think it's just kind of ingrained in my brain where it's like,
It's
okay,
part of your
I know
nature.
about this. I need to pick it apart. I need to understand every facet of it. I need to know what's new. I need to know what's developing. Because for me, it's all like, it's history in the making. It's happening right now. So any new publishers that sprout up, anything that comes across the grapevine, like I'm there. I just want to see it and document it. So that's I don't know. Like I said, blame it on me being the history major. But yeah, with that, I'd like to end the show. We'll come back next week for more comic book talk, where we will be trying to look at some new books. We have selected some new number ones that hopefully we'll be able to follow. And I just like to plug those really quickly. That is Geiger number one, a new series from Image by writer Jeff Johns and artist Gary Frank. The Silver Coin, which is a uh, not really an anthology series. I guess it will be an anthology series when it's collected, but it's a new writer each issue, but with the same artist, and it's the first issue is written by Chip Zdarsky, who is the artist on Sex Criminals that we previously mentioned. And then we'll be taking a look at Noctera number two, just because that's a fairly new series, and I think it'll be a great one to follow. And then if we have any other books that we read recently, or that we think are interesting and we'd like to mention, we'll be sure to include those. But as always, you amazing humans out there, thank you so very much for listening. You're the reason why we do this. Visit campsite.bio/Not a Robot Comics to hear all of our episodes on nearly any podcast platform, and patreon.com/Not a Robot Podcast for the exclusive content we make for our patrons from all of our offerings. Kids Corner, Real Talk, movies, TV, and more. Again, starting at just $1 a month. Visit notarobotpodcast.com, and that will take you everywhere you need to go for everything Not a Robot. So we have a way that we sign off on our other podcasts, but I think if it's just going to be the two of us in the future, we can figure something out. But for now, with that, there's only one way that we say goodbye around here. Until next time, be good to each other and don't be a robot.
Deuces.
Just